is your favorite food? Pizza, pasta, steak, or maybe you like my favorite food, chocolate. Now I want you to think about why you have to eat. I bet you said to get energy, and you're right. One of the reasons we eat is to get energy for our body so we can carry out all of our life functions. However, there's another very important reason you have to eat. We also have to eat to build our bodies. Think about it this way. You are much bigger today than you were on the day you were born. In order to grow, you had to make more cells. To make those cells, you had to have raw materials to build them out of. For example, if you were going to build a house, you might need raw materials like wood, nails, and paint. To build your body, you use 4 main materials: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. These 4 molecules, also called biomolecules, not only make up your body, but the cells of all living things. Today, we are going to review Tech 9A, one of the readiness standards for your biology EOC exam. The student is expected to compare the structures and functions of different types of biomolecules, including carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So our goal today is to compare the structures and functions of the 4 biomolecules. In other words, we want to know what they look like, their structure, and what they do, their function. We're also going to talk about how these biomolecules are made. The first thing you need to know is that all 4 of these biomolecules, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids, are large molecules. These large molecules are also called macromolecules because macro means large. Each of these large molecules is made by joining together many smaller pieces. Think of it like stringing together beads to make a necklace. In the case of macromolecules, the smaller pieces are called monomers. If you put many small pieces together, you form a macromolecule or polymer. So I'm putting small pieces together to form a larger structure. And so this larger structure would be called a polymer. Now I want you to apply this to our analogy. Let's look at this necklace here. Would the individual beads on this necklace be called monomers or polymers? That's right, they're the monomers, the little pieces. So then I want you to think about this entire necklace, this whole necklace here. Would this necklace represent monomers or polymers? It would represent a polymer. It is the larger substance that we made by joining together many smaller pieces. Now let's go back to food and apply this idea to one of the 4 macromolecule groups. Let's say that for lunch you eat a hamburger. A hamburger is made of protein. Proteins are one of our macromolecules or polymers. So a hamburger is made of polymers. The proteins in the hamburger are made out of smaller pieces. Remember, polymers are made out of smaller pieces. What are those smaller pieces called? That's right, they're the monomers. So when you swallow this hamburger here, it's going to go into your stomach. I want you to think about what happens to your food when it's in your stomach. You start to digest the hamburger. You start to digest your food. When you digest your food, you are breaking it down into smaller pieces, just like this. Since that hamburger is made of protein, which is a polymer, when you break it down into smaller pieces, what will you end up with? That's right, you'll end up with monomers. Now your body can use those monomers you got from food to build you. For example, your muscles are made out of protein. In order to build muscle, you need to put monomers together to make a protein polymer. In other words, the pieces from the hamburger, the monomers, might be used to build your muscles, which are a polymer. So you see, you really are what you eat. When a polymer is broken into monomers, like when you digest the protein in a hamburger, a chemical reaction is taking place. This type of chemical reaction is called a hydrolysis reaction. If you look at the word hydrolysis, this part, lysis, means to break. So a hydrolysis reaction breaks apart a polymer. If we look at this diagram, here, this part here, we can see a polymer. So this whole thing is a polymer. When a polymer breaks apart, what are we left with? That's right, monomers. So then that means that each of these little pieces is a monomer. Be sure to label this on your student guide. There are other chemical reactions that join monomers together to make polymers, like when you build muscle. These reactions are called dehydration synthesis reactions. The word synthesis means to make. So a synthesis reaction makes something bigger out of small pieces. In other words, it forms a polymer from a monomer. You can see in this picture here that we have two monomers and that they are being joined together. We can see that over here. If several monomers are joined together, then we end up with this structure here, which is a polymer. Be sure to label the picture in your student guide. Now let's practice and make sure you've got the basics before we go on. What are polymers made of? If you said monomers, you are correct. What happens during a dehydration synthesis reaction? Dehydration synthesis reactions join things together, so they form polymers by joining together monomers. When monomers are joined together, they form a polymer. Very good. What happens during a hydrolysis reaction? In hydrolysis, we break apart a polymer into many smaller monomers. Now, let's look at each of the four macromolecule groups, or biomolecules, and identify its structure and its function. As we go over each group, be sure to fill in the chart in your student guide. Make sure you note what elements the macromolecule is made of, its monomer, and then also its function. In other words, why is that biomolecule important? We will start with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates include sugars and starches. When you eat things like pasta, candy, rice, potatoes, bread, fruit, you're eating carbohydrates. Like all biomolecules, carbohydrates are polymers. And what are polymers made of again? That's right, monomers. The monomer for carbohydrates has a special name. It's called a monosaccharide. So we can see the monomer of a carbohydrate here. This is a monosaccharide. Make sure you add that to your chart. Glucose is a monosaccharide. Now, if you combine many monosaccharides together, as they're showing you in this picture here, each of these is a monosaccharide, then you create a polysaccharide. So starch, in this picture, is an example of a polysaccharide. This is a monosaccharide called glucose. Notice that it is made of the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Make sure that you fill this in on your chart. All carbohydrates, every single one, contains carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Glucose happens to be very important for our cells. Do you remember why your cells need glucose? Our cells use glucose for energy. Inside your cells, your mitochondria break down glucose. So we can see a mitochondria here. The mitochondria break down glucose and store its energy in ATP. So one of the main functions of carbohydrates is to provide us with quick energy. This is a polysaccharide called cellulose. Do you remember what types of cells have cellulose? Plant cells have cellulose in their cell walls. Carbohydrates like cellulose help provide structure for cells. Now check your chart and make sure you filled in everything for carbohydrates. Let's make sure you know the structure and function of a carbohydrate. What is the monomer of a carbohydrate called? That's right, monosaccharide. And if we put many monosaccharides together, then what did we get? A polysaccharide. And why do our bodies need carbohydrates? They give us quick energy, like glucose. Let's look at another biomolecule that gives us energy, lipids. Lipids include fats, oils, and waxes. We'll focus on fats first. Most people think of fat as a bad thing. However, your body needs some fat. Now, lipids don't have a true monomer, but they are made of fatty acids. Let's look at this picture of fatty acids. I want you to write down the elements you see in your chart. If you said carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, then you are absolutely correct. Lipids are very good for storing energy. Think about a bear getting ready to hibernate for the winter. What does that bear pack on? That's right, fat, which is a lipid. That's because lipids store energy that can be used later. The bear will live off that stored fat while it's hibernating all winter long. Lipids are important for another reason as well. Lipids are the main component of our cell membranes. Every cell in your body is surrounded by a membrane that is made of phospholipids. This picture shows you how those phospholipids are arranged to make up the membrane of the cell. So you can see the phospholipids here. Without phospholipids, or lipids, we couldn't have cells. Now let's compare lipids and carbohydrates and make sure you know the structure and function of each of these biomolecules. How are the structures of carbohydrates and lipids similar? Both carbohydrates and lipids are formed of the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Which biomolecule provides us with quick energy? Would that be carbohydrates or lipids? If you said carbohydrates, you're correct. Which biomolecule is used to store energy and also makes up cell membranes? That's right, lipids. What is the monomer of a carbohydrate? A monosaccharide.